Hi, I'm Alice and this is video 6 of the Breaking Ground series, A Journey of Change. In our last videos, we've focused on awareness. We need to practice this as a lifestyle choice. I'm hoping that you've started to notice more your bodily affective states and possibly the ways that you go towards your world, the ways that you relate. How do you think you may be co-creating some of the problems that you experience in your life? I'm hoping that also you've managed to pay more attention to your senses and that you've savored these things and allowed yourself to be more fully grounded in the now. The awareness section aimed to also help you see where you are. We need to see these things in order to start to take responsibility for the things that we can change in our lives. Change is a lifelong process. We just need to take little steps forward at a time. The focus now is on building self-support. An important part of building self-support is growing in our sense of self. Another important part of that self-support is our growing in our capacity to nurture ourselves. These two things strengthen our inner being. And it's when this inner being is strengthened that we can feel safer to open to the things of God. Today's focus is on building a sense of self from what you know about yourself. In our next video, we'll look at identity in Christ. This is a tremendous support for us in building our sense of who we are as Christians. When it comes to building sense of self, it's problematic when we define ourselves too much around external things, because those things can change. We need a definition that's based on what we know about ourselves from within. So storms can come, and when they do, these roles and external things can change. And if our favorite ingredients of self-definition are too much based on those external things, then when those things are gone, we find that our identity is very shaken and it's hard to stand. I want to give you a scenario, a made-up scenario of Fred. Fred is feeling lost and down, maybe even depressed and overwhelmed with anxiety. COVID has hit hard. Fred's business has completely come to a standstill. His economic future is now totally unstable, and liquidation looks likely. Marital conflict has escalated beyond what Fred has ever known, and he wonders if divorce is on the horizon. Fred's teenage children are behaving erratically. They're more aggressive than usual, emotional and difficult. He's not used to spending so much time around his family, and he doesn't know how to help or satisfy them. Fred is used to being able to give his children what they want or need, but now he can't. Fred feels out of control, hopeless, useless, helpless. Everything he based his identity on has been shaken. Fred's identity is largely based on his work. The recognition and praise he got from his work colleagues is no longer there to pump up Fred's ego. Meeting goals and successfully completing projects made him feel a sense of mastery and competency that kept his deep feelings of shame and inadequacy at bay. Let's pause here for a minute. For many of us, a large part of our sense of self comes from our work role. And so we need to be productive, we need to be busy, we need to do in order to feel okay about ourselves. And when all of these props for our sense of self from work are no longer there, we can find ourselves in quite a shaky place. Back to Fred. Fred's identity is largely based on his role as a husband and a father. His treasured image of being a dependable family man is now questionable. He wonders if he's a good husband, and he feels like he's failing as a father to keep his children content and flourishing. Let's stop here too. COVID time has caused a lot of family turmoil. I'm wondering, what has this done for you in terms of your sense of self in regard to those roles as husband or wife, or mother or father? It can be a very trying time for many of us. Fred's competence in all of these things is now uncertain and dissolving. All these roles fed his sense of worth and told him who he was. Now that Fred's favorite ingredients of self-definition are thoroughly shaken, he feels lost, and he no longer knows who he is. Fred fed his sense of worth from outside of himself, but he had little to no sense of worth from within. Fred needs to find some ingredients of self-definition that come from what he recognizes about himself. Well, Fred's story is like many of our stories. We've attached too much of our sense of self to outside things. And we also, at times, when we're triggered, we reduce our self-definition to the lies that we may believe. And all of these things are very incorrect summaries of who we really are. We need to recognize all the different characteristics or selves that make up who we are. I like this quote from Irving Polster in his book, A Population of Selves. He says, with the naming of each self, the self becomes an agent of the person, brightly organized, a banner, so to speak, around which the person rallies his psychological energies. Naming what you recognize about yourself helps to expand your self possibilities. It's also the naming of these selves that helps us to mobilize our energies towards living out what we believe about ourselves. Violet Oaklander, in her book, Hidden Treasure, says helping the child develop a strong sense of self is a major prerequisite in helping him express buried emotions. Further, the child begins to feel a sense of well-being, as well as a positive feeling about himself. In my journey of growing, initially I lacked that self-support, that inner strength. So I would desensitize. I numbed myself to my own painful emotions. I also pushed my emotions back into my body. I did not hear God for myself in this period of my journey. I really did feel forsaken by God. But as I took the choice to build a stronger sense of self, and as I chose to begin to nurture myself more, I began to feel more content, and my inner strength had grown. It was then that I started to hear God for myself. And it was then that I was able to start being in contact with those painful emotions I had in order to heal. So do you see that building sense of self, it's a very important part of building self-support so that you can do the journey of healing. In a play therapy process, when I'm working with a child, we intentionally build the child's sense of self. We construct a list of I statements. I'm always looking, and I catch the child doing something that tells me who or how they are, and I reflect it back to them. We turn it into an I statement, and then we make a note of these things. So for instance, a child comes in and starts to organize everything on the desk. The pens or the crayons are neatly ordered, the paper is straight, and so I will reflect back to the child, "Ooh, you like things to be neat and tidy, don't you?" And the child will agree, and then we'll write down on his list, "I'm a neat and tidy boy." If I'm playing soccer and I trip, the child comes over and shows kindness and caring. then I will reflect on this and we will write down, I'm a kind and caring person. Maybe the child runs over to help me pack up. And so we also write down, I'm a good helper. So do you see how I am always intentionally building the self? And as the child grows in his sense of self, he becomes more energized to live out these things. His sense of self is expanded, and he feels a greater sense of well-being. It's no different really for an adult. When we have a poor sense of self, we need to take the time to build those I statements. And it's a wonderful exercise to do for your children. Sometimes it's what others point out that helps us recognize who or how we are. In your groups, if you're part of a group process, take time to reflect back to people what you notice about them. At church, the one day my friend told me how I was just this person that would go everywhere, talk to anyone and everyone, that I was a welcoming person. And it was then that I registered, oh, yes, I am a welcoming person. And so I went and signed up at visitor's duty and I began to serve at church in this way. So do you see how recognizing these things about yourself energizes you towards behaving around your beliefs? It's important when you are sharing feedback to make it very specific. Because these general statements like, you're a star, they're often things that can't be taken in if the person that you are giving feedback to has negative beliefs about themselves. Violet Oaklander, in her book Hidden Treasure, says, we form a belief system about ourselves and how to function in the world at a very young age. And we take this belief system with us into adulthood. Most of our beliefs are in place by the age of 7. Children believe what's said about them, or they form their own understanding from what they experience. Children are very egocentric. They often blame themselves for things that go wrong in their lives. So if there's divorce, family conflict, difficulties at school, difficulties with friends, difficulties with siblings, they drink in many negative things about themselves. These beliefs, they powerfully influence us throughout life. If you're someone that gets triggered often, you have many negative self-beliefs. You may not know them because they operate often outside of our awareness, but you feel what you believe. In your group discussion time, you're going to take time to help to build each other's sense of self. But you yourself also need to take some time to notice the different selves that make up you. You need to register these things, drink these things in. You also need to recognize the limiting self-beliefs that you have been giving too much attention to. And you need to choose to give less attention to these things. We present different aspects of ourselves in different situations. We don't behave the same all the time. We have different selves that come to the fore depending on the circumstance. So we're not one fixed entity. We're more of a fluid process. So for instance, at work, you will be more your professional self, your business self, your organized, efficient, confident, assertive manager self. But at home, you're probably more the nurturing self, the affectionate self, the spontaneous, playful, maybe sloppy self. So we can be different things in different contexts. So don't be tempted to cancel any recognition of positive aspects just because you're not always like that. So for instance, some people would see me more as a serious person, but actually I'm also very playful and spontaneous if I'm with a child. I can be both things. At the end of this video, take some time, get a piece of paper. At the top of it, write, I am. and then set a timer for 1 minute and write down as many different characteristics or selves that you recognize as being true of yourself. This will be a good indication for you as to whether you have a strong sense of self or not. If you have very few selves on that list, you need to take some time to build your sense of self. In our next video, we're going to continue to build our sense of self by looking at our identity in Christ. Identity in Christ is a very important anchor in those times of storms. And it's also very important to have ready because at some point in your journey, you're going to start to face your shadow self more and more. That's all for this video. In our next video, we look at identity in Christ. Thank you for listening.